going to a lot of funerals, a lot of saying goodbye to friends and family, but there's something that I've noticed, and hey, maybe it's not just me, the way in which we do this seems to be changing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's another post-COVID thing, that the way in which we say goodbye, the way in which we remember somebody's life. I mean, often people are saying, oh no, I don't want to bother with a funeral now, just cremate me and perhaps have a memorial service or a wake. And whilst it comes down to an individual choice, how do we do this well? How do we say goodbye well to our loved ones, and how do we celebrate their life, particularly from a faith perspective? Joining us on the program now, Head of Theology at Laidlaw College, Dr. Myk Habets. Myk, kia ora.
Kia ora.
And yeah, sorry to bring you in as Dr. Death on this one. A very cheerful topic today, but honestly, it is an important part of life. It is something which does happen to all of us and the best of us. We've got to find a good way of doing this, right?
Yeah, two certainties. That's hard to say. In life, they say tax and death.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I went to a few funerals just at the end of COVID, which were kind of unusual affairs. Small numbers and the rest of it. Funerals and death, and more importantly, even perhaps than death, dying.
Yeah,
have always been really important in the Christian faith, because it's at such times when the coherence and the meaning of a faith really kicks in, or it doesn't.
yeah.
Like if it's a sham, if it's a fairy tale, if it's all for nothing, then in the teeth of and grip of death, you give it up. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And what we've found in Christianity over now a long, long time is that there is something quite beautiful about death and dying. It's also tragic.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not stoics. We're not unemotional, silly people. Que sera, whatever will be, will be.
Yeah.
But Christian funerals at their best are just beautiful remembrances of a life well lived and a life that continues.
Yes.
And that's quite a stark contrast in our overly industrialized, medicalized West, where the greatest sin, I would argue, well, there's two greatest sins in our culture. One is being intolerant, and the other is dying. Dying's a sin. Dying's a tragedy. Dying's a failure. It's a failure of the medical profession. It's a failure of our medical prowess, of our technological abilities. We're failures because we die. And so every magazine, every advert, every program is about, just inject yourself, fill yourself, medicalize yourself, go under surgery, just everything to just almost be frozen in time.
Yeah.
We're petrified of what we can't control in the West, and it's creating, rather ironically in tragedy, not a culture of life, but a culture of death. More anxiety, more depression, more medication. It's this weird, miserable spiral.
Yeah. And
Christians, of all people, we've got something positive, incredibly positive to say into that.
It can get challenging at times. I suppose different people have different views of death, and at any funeral, there'll be people who have different ideas of the afterlife and faith and those sorts of things, and they all get to have a vote in what they think should happen. And sometimes, of course, in families, that gets messy, that gets complicated. You would hope, though, that as people of faith, we would have something positive to say into this space. You would think if anybody knows how to die well and how to remember lost loved ones, especially people who had faith of their own, that Christians should be leading the charge, should be showing the way in this regard.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where a really good minister really helps, someone who can guide that process. The church we used to belong to, we're at a different one now, but Windsor Park Baptist Church, I'll name it. I mean, they developed their own funeral service. It was the first church in New Zealand that operated a commercial funeral service.
Okay.
And it was and is deeply embedded in their view of what it means to live Christianly in this world, in a world in which we do die, to provide wraparound services and for people who are or aren't Christians. It's not exclusively for Christians, but it is a Christian service, and it is a reminder to the people who are left behind, there is hope. Yeah. There is a future. There is more to what we see than what we see with our eyes. And I thought that was a brilliant initiative, and it's going well, and maybe there should be more of them. The other thing I think that we need to probably do more as Christians is we need to talk more about the things that are important rather than talking about the things that are either urgent or just, I don't know, contextual. So yes, we need to talk about politics and economics and housing crisis. Yeah, absolutely. But we also need to talk about other things that are deeply concerned about, like death and dying. For instance, a church I once attended, we had this guy, he was awesome. He was just a normal bloke. He was a faithful, passionate Christian. He was older than me. I enjoyed spending time with him. He's just a really good fella and a really good Christian. He gets diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I'm on the leadership at the time. And I was asked to go see him, particularly in hospice, because we were concerned that he wasn't facing his death seriously enough. Like it didn't seem to have hit him. And he was dying. There was no question about it. He had weeks to live. I went and visited him, and I sort of, politely, after some chit-chat, said, now, like, you do know that your prognosis is a couple of weeks, a month at best? He goes, yeah, of course, I'm well aware of that, he goes. And you haven't really displayed any remorse, or no, not remorse, you just seem happy. You just, it's quite unusual. And he looked at me and he goes, I haven't lost my mind, Mike. He said, what have we been reading, teaching, preaching and hearing for our whole Christian lives? That you die and you're with Christ. You die and eventually is the great resurrection. He said, I am really depressed and upset for my family that I leave behind. But I'm not upset for myself. This is where our theology hits the road, Mike. And so I was like, oh, praise the Lord. I want to be like him when I'm dying. He wasn't in la-la land. He wasn't ignoring stuff. He wasn't suppressing his emotions. His passionate belief in the afterlife. His family, we had to go through and the whole tragedy and the depression, absolutely. But there was something beautiful about his death, if we can use that oxymoron. And I just don't think we talk enough while we're living about those sorts of saints, those sort of heroes of the faith.
Certainly. I mean, there is
his license plate. Just I want to share. I won't mention it, but if there's families listening, they'll know who I'm talking about. His license plate summed up his life and his dying. Carpe diem. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Very good indeed. Now, I suppose with a funeral comes an opportunity to talk about those serious topics of life and death, and maybe an opportunity for us to look. Seriously, Bible bashing people over a mediocre sausage roll is never a good idea. But at least an opportunity to chat about what life means, what faith means. I suppose it is one of those thin spaces where we can have conversations with friends or family members, which perhaps wouldn't be as appropriate in other circumstances. I mean, it's a tricky balance to get right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I just take my cues from people who are much, much better at this than I am, like my wife, who is the pastor, and others. But I think it's pretty mundane, the answer, but it's pretty awesome. So we offer people, would you like some meals? Would you, if you've got young children, do you need any help with some childcare? Can we as a faith community that loved and supported this person who's dying, can we offer you any of that same love and support in real tangible ways? And we can testify, you can probably testify to when we do this. They're like, oh yeah, I guess a couple of meals would be nice. And they're sort of all a bit, but then they're really appreciative because it means they're not cooking a meal, or they are getting driven somewhere, or their kids are looked after. And then they start asking us questions. So, sorry, who are you guys? Why do you do this? One recent example from our church where we were doing this for a family. The family weren't going to church, hadn't for a long time, but the person who died, their family member was a long time passionate member of our church. And through the care of the community to that family, they were starting to say things like, we now realize why such and such so loved this church. And we just sort of say back to them, it's because Christ first loved her, that she then loves us and we then love you. And so we're trying to deflect to Christ, and it's really quite simple, but quite profound. Even I can do that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Practical Christianity at its best.
Very good stuff indeed. And finding, I suppose, opportunities of grace even within tragic circumstances. Myk, Got to give a shout out to your background if people are listening to this on the radio. Absolutely superb backgrounds to this Zoom conversation with Dr. Myk Habets. And if you'd like to find out more, not about his background, but, his background in a different sense, of course, at Laidlaw College, a wonderful place to study theology, laidlaw.ac.nz. Myk, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, listeners.